or at least it's meant to be summer, it's pouring with rain right now, I thought it would only make sense to show you how to make a naked cake. Now this trend came about probably a couple of years ago and it's really stuck. Now, I don't do the true naked cake, which means you can really see everything of the sponge, all the sponge, sorry, on the outside, and then it's just sandwiched and left. I think that dries out the cake slightly, so I like to crumb coat it in a sense and then decorate it. I'm also going to show you how to add a filling. So I'm going to use jam today because I know a lot of you wanted to see that rather than just fill the middle with buttercream. And it's been a while since I've actually built up a cake from the beginning, so I'm going to start with cutting my sponge cake. So this is a vanilla 6-inch sponge cake. I baked these yesterday, wrapped them in cling film and used today. I think that way there's less crumbs. If you've ever tried decorating a fresh sponge, you'll know how soft and crummy they are. So I think it's better doing it like this. Anyway, so I'm going to start with one of the sponge cakes and I'm going to cut the top off. Just make a little indent and rotate the cake as I cut. So never cut all the way through because you're never going to get a straight line. You can use a cake wire. I don't. I just cut it like this, slowly, and then eventually you cut all the way through and take it off. And you have a perfectly flat edge. Now you can keep the top just to nibble on or to make cake pops or give to your friends, etc. Now what I actually have started to do is use this as a guide for the next one to make sure that I get really even layers. So I'm going to rest my knife on the first sponge that I just cut and use that to mark where to cut the top off. And once I've gone back round, I don't need that cake anymore because I can see where I've cut it. Just careful of your fingers. And off the top. And now I'm going to cut these both in half. Again, mark all the way around before I cut into the cake. And there I've got 4 perfectly even cake layers. See, no cake wire needed. I'm now going to soak my layers in my sugar syrup. I actually like doing it at this stage now, just to avoid getting too, having too much going on when you're building up the cake. So not too much, just an even layer of the sugar syrup. This keeps it nice and moist. And you can also flavour this as well. Now just remember that one of the bases of the sponge is going to be the very bottom of the cake and one of them is going to be the very top because they're very flat, so it helps you achieve that flat top. And also when you cut through the cake, you don't get a layer of crumb. So if you put, for example, this one in the middle and you cut it open, you get a really dark layer. So it's best to avoid that. So when your layers are ready and soaked, you can start building up your cake. I've got a thin cake card here and a little wet towel to stop my cake board from slipping around. I also have a large amount of my Swiss meringue buttercream and I'm just going to put a little bit on the board and go with one of the bases upright. I'm just going to press it down so it's nice and secure. So what I would usually do if I was just doing vanilla is pipe a kind of spiral shape onto the cake, but because we're going to fill the layers, we want to pipe a border around the side, like this. So you can kind of see that I've done a ring around the edge of the sponge, and now I'm going to fill the middle. The reason for this is because we don't want the filling, such as jam, which is what I'm using, or lemon curd or anything else to spill out the sides. So this is kind of a protective border. Now you can go in with your filling, spread it out evenly. And now you can go on with more buttercream. And when you're filling a cake, it is easier to use a piping bag. I'm going to smooth that out to make a nice even layer. When I'm smoothing, I'm really turning the table. I'm not moving this hand so much, and I'm using the shape of the palette knife to do the work for me. And now I can go on with my next layer. So I'm just going to make sure that it's sponge on both sides, line it up, and repeat until I get to the last layer. So I've got my last layer here and I'm putting it upside down so the flat edge is on top. Give it a little push. Make sure the edges are as straight as possible. And now what I like doing is go around the almost creases or the gaps basically with some more buttercream. And this guarantees they fill any gaps in the sides. And it also applies that extra buttercream that you need for the crumb coating. So I'm using the shape of the palette knife to really press the buttercream into the cake and fill any gaps. And you want to encase the whole cake in buttercream. You don't need such a thick layer. You're just encasing all the crumbs, so the next stage is a little easier. Now you really don't need a lot of buttercream on the top. That's something that I've started to notice when I do my workshops. Some people try to build up a lot of buttercream on the top, but you don't need to because the cake is flat, so take advantage of it. So I'm actually going to scrape off the buttercream, and I'll just use this bowl to put any excess buttercream in. Unfortunately, you can't reuse that buttercream because it's got crumbs in, so if you put that on the outer layer, you're going to have a mess. So that can go with the little cake scraps that you're eating later. So I'm using the outer edge of my palette knife to scrape off the excess. And I start with the top of the cake first, and you'll see why. So you can see the cake coming through, and that's not an issue. Now I've got a scraper, and I'm going to scrape all this excess buttercream off. So I'm going to start on the side, and my pressure is going to be focused on the bottom corner of the cake. Again, some people hold the scraper like further up and you naturally get a slight tilt. If you focus the pressure down, the rest will be straight. And every now and then you can scrape that into a bowl. So like I said, take advantage of the shape of the cake. The sides of the cake should be straight and the top is. So you want to scrape as much buttercream as possible to maintain those straight edges. Now what could happen is because you have that extra filling in, you may feel the cake move around a bit. During the stage, you can just gently push the layers back into place. You can use your scraper to kind of line up the edges, but that is why it's so important to have that border of buttercream so the filling doesn't seep out. So once you've finished with the sides, now you can concentrate on the top. And as you can see, when you've been scraping the sides, the buttercream almost pushes upwards, and this is how you get the sharp corners. So make sure your palette knife and scraper is, sort of clean, but you want a clean palette knife because you're going to go over the corners like this and swipe away the excess buttercream. Scrape your palette knife every time because if there's some buttercream on there, you're going to put more buttercream on the cake and you want to scrape it clean. So there you have a fully crumb coated cake. Now it looks pretty good and it looks like it's ready to be decorated if you want the naked style. But I like going over with a second layer of buttercream. Still a very thin one, so you get the cake poking through, but I just think it gives it a little bit of a cleaner look to it. So I'm actually going to put this in the fridge like I would do with any normal cake for about half an hour, or you could put it in the freezer for 10 minutes to firm up this crumb coat to then have it ready for the next layer of buttercream. Okay, so the first layer of buttercream is nicely chilled, so I'm going to go over with a second layer. Now I've obviously made a ton of buttercream that I don't need, as per usual, but I'm just going to apply just a small amount of buttercream, a bit around the edge as well. So really not that much, not like we're doing a whole second layer of buttercream like we usually do. This is just to kind of finish off any gaps or holes in the buttercream. So I'm going to start off with the top. Now I'm going to go around the sides. So I can still see the cake coming through. So before we scrape, I'm going to go around the top again and almost push the buttercream off the edge. So basically, when you are scraping and finalizing the shape of the cake, you do it in this order. You go top, sides, top again. Because every time you touch the sides, the top gets affected. So you want to start off with the top and push that buttercream over the edge. Now get the scraper and scrape around the sides. So I am applying quite a bit of pressure because I still want that naked effect, but the second layer of buttercream that I've just done just gives it an extra smooth finish. So you can see what I'm saying, it's really getting nice and smooth, even though you can still see the sponge coming through. So you're getting the naked effect, but it still looks really nice and neat. Because if you leave it just on the last stage of the crumb coating, it does run the risk of it looking a bit messy still. Whereas this, you get to really perfect that buttercream and make it look pretty perfect. With the last kind of slide of the scraper, I begin moving the turntable before I place it onto the cake and try and do one long, swift movement. And that is how you avoid getting any seams or lines in the buttercream, because if you kind of place it on and then go, you get that line of indentation in the buttercream. So move it before you place it on and keep it moving when you take it off. So here is when I look for any gaps or anything, but I actually really like how that has turned out. Now you can also see that the buttercream has been pushed upwards, and now we can achieve those sharp corners again. So like I said before, you have to do the sides before you do the top. Just one swift movement and clean the palette knife. That looks pretty perfect to me. Really happy with how that turned out, and this is why I like doing the second layer of buttercream. Now it's time to decorate, so I'm going to add a rose gold drip and also some little decorations, but obviously you can do whatever you want. To make the rose gold drip, you need to do the white chocolate ganache drips, like my other video. So this needs to go in the freezer to get it nice and cold before I do that. So I'm going to put it in the freezer for about 15 minutes and then get the drips ready. Okay, so the cake is nice and cold, which is a must when you're using white chocolate ganache. I haven't coloured mine white because we're going to be painting over it. And I've also put it in a piping bag. I just find with white chocolate ganache, you can control it a lot better. So I'm just going to snip off the very top of the bag. And I'm just going to do half the cake, because that's what I've decided to do. So just very gently I'm going to go round. And I'm applying different pressures to achieve different lengths of the drips. So what I've also started to learn with white chocolate is if you've done the piping around the edge and then you kind of go over and fill this in, you run the risk of more chocolate going over and you actually get a lot of those kind of double drips. So I've just done a thin border here and then I've left it. And now this goes back in the fridge until the drips are completely set so I can paint over them. Now while I'm waiting for the drips to set, I thought it would be nice to do some of my chocolate ruffles, but this time colour them slightly pink to kind of go with the rose gold theme. So I've melted some white chocolate here and I've got some chocolate food colouring. This is really important. You can't use any food colouring in chocolate because it splits. So I think the food colouring has certain oils and maybe some cocoa butter in to make sure the chocolate doesn't split. So this one's a gel. I'm just going to add a little drop and mix it in. So as always, I've got a tray and I'm going to flip it over and spread a thin layer of chocolate on the tray. Got a really large palette knife here, so this helps spread it out nice and evenly. White chocolate is a lot more loose than dark or milk because of the amount of cocoa butter in it. So it's easier to spread thinner, which kind of makes things a little harder. So I'm going to put this in the fridge for about 5 minutes for it to cloud over before I ruffle it. So the chocolate is nice and set. I did actually try it before, but it wasn't quite ready, so I put it back in the fridge for a further 5 minutes. So I just need to wait until the perfect consistency and then I'll start ruffling. The white chocolate tends to heat up quite quickly, so already I can see it going a bit soft, so I'm going to put it back in the fridge for 5 minutes and then try it again. So it's usually the thinner bits that heat up quicker, so they're a little bit more temperamental. That is better now. I do find the white chocolate ruffles are a lot trickier just because the temperature varies so much. These are looking good now. And I'm going to set these in the fridge until I need them for decorating. Okay, so I have had this cake in the fridge for about an hour and a half. The ganache is nice and set, and it has to be at this stage before you start painting on it. Now obviously you can paint them, the drips, whichever colour you want. I'm going to do rose gold. Now I actually bought a rose gold luster dust. I thought it was a bit, it kind of wasn't gold enough, even though it's rose gold. So I ended up making a mix of gold and rose gold, and I've put it in a little container. I've actually used this before, so it's had, I think it was lemon juice in there before, but all the liquid evaporates and I'm left with the powder. So I'm going to reuse that powder, and I have some lemon juice here, and I'm going to start off with a few drops and mix that into the powder to form the paint. Oops. Without trying to spill it everywhere. Okay, so it's a nice consistency, and now this does require a bit of patience. If you've seen my gold drip tutorial, you'll know why. But I'm just going to carefully paint on all the drips. So once you are happy with how it looks, you could decorate it. So I don't worry too much about painting the very top. I do just a bit because the drips will like kind of peek out of the decorations. But I have the chocolate ruffles that I made before and some macarons and meringue kisses. And I've also put some leftover buttercream in a piping bag, and I'm using a number PME 13. It's actually my favorite nozzle. I finish off all my cakes with this. And I've colored some of the buttercream pink and left some white because I like the two-tone effect. So I'm just gonna go on with a few swirls and stars. I'm doing my normal kind of crescent top. I quite like the asymmetric look. So piping buttercream is great to stick on the decorations as well as looking pretty. So I'm going to go on with my other decorations randomly. I love the contrast of the pink. Even though rose gold isn't pink, it's kind of a pinky gold, so I always go for pink decorations. And finally, the chocolate ruffles. And I like putting them in last, just to fill the spaces. And I'm also just securing all the decorations in place, especially the ruffles. So there we go, a naked cake with a rose gold drip. So this has kind of been a 3-in-1 tutorial, so count yourselves lucky. I've shown you how to make a naked cake. I've also shown you how to fill it with a filling, such as jam, and how to make a lovely rose gold drip. So you can kind of see why I only did half the cake. You do need a bit of patience, but it looks beautiful. So try it out. If you do, as usual, please tag me at George's Cakes on Instagram. I've been seeing loads of your creations and it just makes me so happy. If you haven't already, please subscribe to my channel and go check out my other videos too. Lots of tutorials there. And if you have any recommendations, then please write in the comments below. I hope you enjoyed it and I will see you very soon.